The wagon lurched violently across the alkali flats, each jolt sending sharp pains through Eliza Hart's already bruised ribs. September 1889 had brought no relief to Wyoming Territory's drought, and the barren landscape stretched endlessly beneath a merciless sun. She clutched her father's leather satchel tighter, knowing the surveyor's maps and documents within could either bring justice to this parched land or seal her fate. The wire fence appeared suddenly across the trail, a trap set with practiced precision. Her horses reared, the wagon tilted, and Eliza found herself face down in the black mud of what had once been a creek bed. Her dress tore at the shoulder, the valise burst open, and her mother's silver comb tumbled out alongside her father's compass. From the dust-choked trail, two riders emerged like specters. Malcolm Pike stood at a distance, his coat gleaming in the harsh light, while his companion, a greasy man the locals called Tom, slid from his saddle and lunged for the scattered papers. Their voices carried that casual menace of men who'd done this before and expected to do it again.
"Well, well,"
Pike drawled.
"if it ain't the surveyor's daughter, carrying trouble in her daddy's bag."
The rifle shot cracked across the empty land like thunder. Caleb Avery and his father Jed thundered down from the cattle trail, their horses' hooves pounding the hardpan. Caleb dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, positioning himself between Eliza and the ambushers, his body a shield against whatever violence might come. "Back away. Tom," Jed Avery commanded, his Winchester steady. "The lady's under our protection now." The would-be robbers retreated toward the dry gulch, Pike's eyes never leaving Eliza's face. "This ain't over, Avery. Some folks need to learn their place." After they'd gone, only the glint of copper wire in the sun and a broken wagon wheel remained as evidence of the accident that had been carefully orchestrated. Eliza trembled, mud caking her hair and face. The weight of her situation crashed over her alone, vulnerable, carrying documents that powerful men would kill for. Through the dirt and tears, she looked up at Caleb, and the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I'm not pure." The confession hung in the air between them. She'd meant to say she wasn't innocent of the danger she brought, wasn't untouched by the harsh realities of frontier life. But the words carried deeper meaning, the weight of rumors that followed her from the railroad camps where she'd sung for coins after her father's death. Caleb knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he wiped the blood from a cut above her eyebrow. Without a word, he retrieved the silver comb from the dust, shook it clean, and began carefully working it through her tangled hair. Each stroke was deliberate, patient, pulling out bits of sagebrush and dirt. "I see you," he said quietly, his voice carrying the steadiness of mountain stone. "I see courage wearing a torn dress. I see beauty that doesn't need defending." The tenderness of the gesture, this rough rancher's son handling her hair with such care, nearly undid her completely, in a land where women were judged as either respectable or fallen, where her past work in saloons branded her as damaged goods. This simple act of grooming restored something she'd thought lost forever. The landscape around them spoke of hardship, alkali dust that burned the lips, wind that sucked moisture from everything it touched, and in the distance, red rock formations baked to a blinding glare by the relentless sun. Buzzards circled overhead, patient as death itself. In Ash Mesa, curious eyes tracked their arrival. The whispers started before they'd even reached the general store. "That's her, the saloon singer. Heard she entertained men for money. No decent woman travels alone." The words stung worse than the cut on her brow. Beatrice Hale, the schoolteacher, pulled them into the schoolhouse near the telegraph station. Her hands were efficient as she cleaned and bandaged Eliza's wounds, but her eyes were sharp as she examined the surveyor's notebook. Water rights, altered stone markers, measurements that didn't match the county records her father had documented it all in his precise hand. "You need to give these to the sheriff," Jed advised, but Beatrice shook her head. "In this town, their safe is where truth goes to die." She looked meaningfully at Eliza. "Your father knew what he was uncovering. That's why they—" She didn't finish, but they all understood. The mine whistle shrieked repeatedly, calling men to their shifts. At the base of the wooden dam controlled by Silas Coyle, Ghost Creek had been diverted into private channels. The public wells ran nearly dry while Coyle's mining operation had all the water it needed. Eliza understood now why her father's maps had been worth killing for. Malcolm Pike arrived at the schoolhouse with Sheriff Watson, presenting official papers for the seizure of evidence pertaining to a criminal investigation. Eliza had no choice but to surrender the satchel. Watching Pike's eyes linger on the bundle tied with red ribbon, her father's most damning surveys. After the door closed behind them, Beatrice pointed to the edge of one map Eliza had hidden in her bodice. Your father used surveyor's shorthand. These symbols indicate secondary caches hidden in the canyon lands. Box Canyon's willows, Sentinel Rock, other places only a surveyor's daughter would understand. Jed offered Eliza temporary shelter at the Avery Ranch. She accepted, knowing she had nowhere else to turn. As Caleb helped her onto his horse for the ride to their homestead, the evening sky blazed crimson. Herons lifted from a dying pond, their wings dark as scattered ash against the fire of sunset. That first night at the ranch, the kitchen stove crackled with pine wood, mixing the scent of butter and milk with smoke. Eliza sat before a cracked mirror while Caleb, having finished the evening chores, took up the silver comb once more. The simple act of grooming became something more, a quiet restoration of dignity, a promise that here, in this house, she was seen as more than her past. I need to tell you, Eliza began, her voice barely above a whisper. When the railroad construction stopped and Papa died, I had nowhere to go. I sang in the saloons. Yes, men bought me drinks, wanted my company. But it doesn't matter what I did or didn't do. The label stuck. Her reflection wavered as tears came. I'm afraid to run, afraid to stay, afraid I'll bring ruin to anyone who helps me. Caleb's hands stilled in her hair. My whole life's been cattle and cold wind, he said. I know horses and ropes and how to read weather, but I'm learning there's dirt on the law here that runs deeper than any canyon. If standing for what's right means standing with you, then that's where I'll be. Through the window, stars emerged like scattered promises across the vast Wyoming sky. The silver comb caught the lamplight as it moved through her hair, each stroke a small rebellion against those who would diminish her worth. In this simple domestic scene lay the seed of something larger, two people choosing to see each other clearly in a land where truth itself had become a dangerous commodity. The morning after Pike's visit to the schoolhouse, Beatrice Hale bent over the confiscated map's edge, her finger tracing the surveyor's shorthand marks that Eliza had managed to keep hidden. Your father was clever, she murmured. These symbols, the triangle with a dot, the double hash marks, they indicate secondary documentation sites, hidden caches throughout the canyon lands. Eliza leaned closer, recognizing her father's precise notations. The weeping willows at Box Canyon, that peculiar formation at Sentinel Rock shaped like a standing guard. Her voice caught. He called them his insurance policies. Jed Avery stood by the window, watching for any sign of Coyle's men. If you're staying at our ranch, Miss Hart, you need to know we're already on thin ice with Coyle, but what's right is right. He turned to face her, his weathered face set with determination. You're welcome as long as you need shelter. The ride to the Avery Ranch took them across the western grasslands as afternoon melted into evening. Caleb kept his horse close to Eliza's, alert for any sign of pursuit. The landscape spread before them in shades of brown and gold bunch grass struggling in the hollows, the distant red rocks glowing like coals in the setting sun. A flight of wild geese passed overhead, their calls lonely in the vast sky. That first evening at the ranch held a quality of suspended time. The kitchen welcomed her with its wood-fired warmth, the smell of baking bread mixing with pine smoke and leather. After supper, Eliza found herself again before the cracked mirror in the small guest room, Caleb standing behind her with her mother's silver comb. You don't have to, she said softly, but he was already working through the tangles left by the day's trials. My mother used to say that tending to someone was how you showed them they mattered. Caleb replied. The comb moved steadily, pulling order from chaos. She died when I was 12. Fever took her during a hard winter. Eliza closed her eyes, allowing herself this moment of care. I used to watch my mother brush her hair every night. 100 strokes, she said, for shine and strength. After she passed, Papa would try, but his hands were made for holding surveying instruments, not combs. A sad smile touched her lips. He'd apologize for pulling too hard, and I'd tell him it was fine, even when it wasn't. Tell me about the saloons, Caleb said quietly. Not because I need to know, but because you need to speak it. Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. The Westward Line Railroad stopped construction when the money ran out. Papa had been surveying the route, but when he died of pneumonia, I had nothing, no family, no funds for a decent burial even. The saloon owner, Mrs. Dulcie, she wasn't unkind. She said I had a pretty voice, could earn enough singing ballads to the workers. She paused, shame coloring her cheeks. I wore nice dresses, smiled when they bought me watered-down drinks. Some wanted more than songs, but Mrs. Dulcie kept a shotgun under the bar. Still, once you've been seen in that life, the stain doesn't wash out. Caleb set the comb aside and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. The only stain I see is from honest work and survival. You're here now, fighting for your father's truth. That takes courage most folks never find. That night, as coyotes called across the grasslands, Eliza lay awake wrestling with her conscience. She could leave, disappear into another territory, let the Averys return to their peaceful life. But her father's voice echoed in memory. True north on a compass, true north in your heart. Eliza girl, don't confuse the two, but don't ignore either one. The next days brought a deceptive calm. Beatrice sent coded telegrams to Denver, receiving cryptic responses about federal interest and evidence requirements. She shared these carefully with Eliza during supposed social visits, always aware that eyes watched even the schoolhouse. Red Elk appeared at the ranch on the 4th day, his arrival as quiet as smoke. The Northern Cheyenne tracker had worked with Jed for years, moving between worlds with practiced ease. Over coffee, he spoke of the old lake beds now dry, the deer trails abandoned. Water doesn't just disappear, he said, his dark eyes serious. It gets stolen. His words gave weight to what Eliza's father had discovered: the systematic diversion of water rights through moved boundary markers and falsified claims. It wasn't just theft, it was the slow strangulation of an entire region. They made their plan by lamplight, voices low. The nearest cache, according to the hidden map, lay in Ghost Narrows, where the old creek still whispered through the rocks. They would need to move at dawn, before Coyle's patrols made their rounds. I should go alone, Eliza insisted. This is my father's work, my risk to take. You go alone. You don't come back, Red Elk stated flatly. These men, they've killed for less than what you carry in your head. Caleb traced the route on the map. We go together, 3 riders, moving fast, in and out before they know we've left the ranch. Jed studied his son, seeing the boy transforming into a man willing to stand for something beyond cattle and grass. You sure about this, son? Once you cross Coyle, there's no uncrossing him. I'm sure, Caleb replied, his eyes finding Eliza's. Some things are worth the risk. The night before their planned departure, tension filled the ranch house. Eliza helped prepare travel rations, her hands steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Caleb cleaned his rifle and checked his revolver, movements automatic from years of practice. As she passed his chair, he caught her hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. That first day, when you said you weren't pure, I need you to understand that purity isn't about the past. It's about the truth in your heart, and yours shines clear as mountain water. Eliza squeezed his fingers, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like a warning. Tomorrow would bring danger. But tonight, in this simple kitchen with its smell of leather and bread, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death, the possibility of belonging. Beatrice arrived after dark with troubling news. Pike's been asking questions about surveying equipment, about whether anyone's seen you with maps. He knows you kept something back. She pressed a small package into Eliza's hands. Photographs of the documents you gave them. I had Terrence at the land office make copies before Pike collected them. If something happens, at least there's a record. The schoolteacher's foresight proved the network of quiet resistance that existed even in Coyle's domain. Not everyone bowed to stolen water and purchased law. As the evening grew late, Caleb performed what had become their nightly ritual. The silver comb moved through Eliza's hair with practiced gentleness, each stroke a promise of care in a harsh world. Neither spoke of what tomorrow might bring, but their reflection in the cracked mirror showed two people preparing for a battle that was larger than themselves. My father used to say that water finds its true course, no matter how men try to channel it. Eliza murmured, I hope he was right. We'll make sure he was, Caleb replied, setting the comb aside. His hands rested briefly on her shoulders, warm and steady. Get some sleep. Dawn comes early, and we've got truth to dig up. The house settled into uneasy quiet, while outside the wind whispered secrets through the grass. Tomorrow, they would ride into danger, but tonight, they had the simple grace of human connection in a land where kindness itself was becoming rare as water. Dawn broke purple and cold across the grasslands as three riders left the Avery Ranch. Eliza rode between Caleb and Red Elk, her father's surveying notes tucked inside her wool coat. The horses' breath clouded in the crisp air, and frost crunched beneath their hooves. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness, leather creaking, bit chains jingling, the distant cry of a hawk riding the morning thermals. As they rode, Eliza taught Caleb to read the surveyor's marks. See that cairn? The stones aren't random. 3 flat, 1 round means a section corner. The moss growth tells you which side faces north. Her voice carried the authority of knowledge passed from father to daughter. Papa said the land speaks its own language if you learn to listen. Like tracking, Red Elk observed, his eyes scanning the horizon. Every mark tells a story. They skirted Coyle's usual patrol routes, following deer paths through the alkali flats. Red Elk rode ahead, reading signs invisible to the others. At one point he raised his hand, and they waited in tense silence as dust clouds in the distance marked riders passing on the main trail. The landscape transformed as they climbed toward the canyon lands. Grassland gave way to red sandstone formations carved by ancient waters. Sagebrush released its medicinal scent as their horses brushed past. High above, a red-tailed hawk circled in the rising thermals, its cry echoing off the rock walls. There! Eliza pointed to a distinctive formation. Sentinel Rock. Papa wrote about the shadow it casts at noon, said it points like a finger to what men try to hide. Ghost narrows opened before them like a wound in the earth. Once, water had carved this channel, but now only memories of moisture remained in the smooth, worn stones. A few stubborn willows clung to life in the deepest recesses, their roots searching for hidden seeps. Eliza dismounted, her hands trembling slightly as she consulted her father's notes. Behind the curtain of stone, beyond the serpent's eye. She read, He always wrote in riddles for the caches, afraid someone might steal his journal. They searched the canyon walls, looking for the formation her father had described. Caleb spotted it first, a natural arch where erosion had created an opening resembling a snake's eye. Behind it, a narrow crack led deeper into the rock. Let me go first, Caleb said, but Eliza shook her head. I know what to look for. Besides, I'm smaller. She squeezed through the gap, her heart pounding. The space beyond was cool and dark, smelling of ancient stone and something else, leather and oil. Her fingers found the oilcloth bundle wedged into a natural shelf. As she pulled it free, Her father's presence seemed to fill the small space. She could almost hear his voice. Truth is like water, Eliza girl. It finds a way. Back in daylight, they unwrapped the package with careful hands. Glass plate photographs, water-stained but legible. Affidavits with signatures and official seals. Maps showing the original water rights before boundaries were moved. Evidence of a conspiracy that reached from Coyle's Dam to the county courthouse. Look at this, Red Elk said quietly, studying one map. The old Cheyenne winter camp. They moved the boundary to cut us off from Eagle Spring. Eliza's eyes burned with unshed tears. Her father had documented not just theft, but the systematic destruction of entire communities. He knew. He tried to stop it, and they... The sound of falling pebbles cut her short. Above them on the rim, Malcolm Pike stood with 6 armed men, their rifles catching the noon sun. The ambush had been perfectly positioned, no cover, no escape route. Well now, Pike called down, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Seems we've caught ourselves some claim jumpers. That's a hanging offense in these parts. Caleb stepped forward, shielding Eliza. We're on open range. Pike, no law against riding the canyons. No law against accidents either. Pike replied. Rocks fall, horses spook, deserts full of bones. They were outnumbered, outgunned, caught in a natural trap. But Eliza's surveyor's eye saw what the others missed: the crack in the canyon wall above Pike's position. The way the recent frosts had widened existing fractures in the sandstone. Moving slowly, as if in defeat, she gripped her father's geological hammer from her saddlebag. Please, she called up, letting her voice break. I'm not pure. I'm just a saloon girl who found some old papers. They're yours if you want them. Pike laughed, the sound ugly in the sacred quiet of the canyon. Boys, the lady's finally seeing sense. Tom, Henry, climb down and collect our property. As the men started their descent, Eliza caught Caleb's eye and glanced meaningfully at the fractured wall. Understanding flashed between them. Red Elk, reading the situation with a tracker's instinct, began slowly backing the horses toward the narrow end of the canyon. Eliza waited until Pike's men were committed to the treacherous descent, then struck. The hammer rang against the rock at precisely the right point her father had taught her how stone speaks, how to find the weakness in any formation. The crack widened with a sound like thunder. The wall! Someone screamed. The sandstone face gave way in a cascade of red rock and dust. Not a killing fall, but enough to send Pike's men scrambling for safety, their planned ambush crumbling like the stone itself in the chaos. Caleb grabbed Eliza and swung her onto his horse, Red Elk leading them through the narrow slot canyon at a desperate gallop. Behind them, Pike's curses echoed off the walls, but they were already beyond rifle range, racing through a landscape that seemed to offer its own protection. The canyon twisted and turned, each bend taking them farther from their pursuers. They didn't slow until they reached a high meadow where aspens grew in defiant clusters. There, as their horses heaved for breath, Eliza broke down. I'm not pure, she sobbed again. But this time the words carried different weight. She wasn't speaking of her past, but of the present of using her father's knowledge to potentially harm others, even in self-defense. Caleb dismounted and pulled her into his arms. From his pocket, he took the silver comb he'd carried it all day like a talisman. As she leaned against him, he worked it gently through her wind-tangled hair. You're brave, he said softly. You're fighting for truth. You're honoring your father. I see nothing but beauty in that. Red Elk kept watch, but his words were for them both. The earth protects those who respect it. Today, the canyon fought for us. They made camp in a hidden grove, not daring to return directly to the ranch. As darkness fell, Eliza spread out the recovered documents by firelight. Each photograph, each sworn statement built the case against a system of theft and corruption that had strangled the territory. We have to get these to the federal authorities, she said. but Pike will be watching every route out of the territory. Then we make our own route, Caleb replied. His face in the firelight showed new lines. The boy who'd rescued her from the mud was becoming a man who understood that some battles were worth any risk. That night, as coyotes sang to the stars, Caleb again performed their quiet ritual. The silver comb moved through Eliza's hair, each stroke a promise that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The simple act had become their language of care, more eloquent than any words. Tomorrow, we'll reach the ranch. Red Elk said, but they'll follow. This isn't over. Eliza touched the documents that had cost her father his life. No, she agreed, but at least now we have the weapons to fight back. The fire burned low, and in its dying light, 3 unlikely allies prepared for a war that would determine whether water and justice would flow freely again in Wyoming territory. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human schemes but bearing witness to human courage. The smoke was visible from 5 miles away, a black column rising against the afternoon sky like a portent of doom. Caleb spurred his horse harder, dread settling in his chest like a stone. Behind him, Eliza and Red Elk pushed their exhausted mounts to match his pace. They crested the final ridge to find the Avery Ranch engulfed in flames. The hay barn blazed like a giant torch, sending sparks swirling into the dry grass. Near the well, Jed Avery lay crumpled, his back purple with bruises, breathing shallow and ragged. The acrid smell of burning wood and hay mixed with something worse, the sickening stench of cattle caught in the inferno. Painted in crude whitewash across the barn door, the message stood stark against the charred wood. Water belongs to the strong. Caleb leapt from his horse, racing to his father. "Pa!" He cradled Jed's head, checking for wounds beyond the obvious beating. They came, 12 of them. Jed wheezed. Coyle himself said this was a warning. His eyes found Eliza. Said next time, they'd burn more than barns. Red Elk had already begun organizing a bucket brigade from the well, but it was futile against the inferno. The screams of trapped calves pierced the air before falling silent, one by one. Each death felt like a knife to Caleb's heart. Those animals had been his responsibility, raised by his own hands. Eliza stood frozen, the weight of guilt crushing her chest. "This is my fault," she whispered. "They burned your home because of me. I brought this destruction to your door." "No." Jed's voice, though weak, carried conviction. He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "You didn't bring the fire, child. They brought it because they fear the light you're shining on their deeds." As neighbors arrived to help the few brave enough to defy Coyle's implicit threat, they worked through the night to save what they could. The house survived. Though smoke damaged, the barn was a total loss. Come dawn, the full devastation became clear. 20 head of cattle dead, winter hay stores destroyed, fences cut in a dozen places. Caleb stood among the ruins, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. Blood seeped from where his nails bit into his palms. The boy who'd trusted in simple justice was learning the cost of standing against men who recognized no law but power. "I should leave," Eliza said, finding him by the burned corral. "If I go, maybe they'll—" "They'll what become honest men?" Caleb's voice was rough with smoke and exhaustion. "You think they'll restore what they've stolen just because you run?" He turned to her, and she saw not anger but determination in his reddened eyes. "Running now means my father suffered for nothing, means those calves died for nothing." That evening, in the smoke-stained kitchen, Caleb performed their nightly ritual with trembling hands. The silver comb moved through Eliza's ash-dusted hair, each stroke pulling free the physical remnants of destruction. It had become more than grooming. It was an act of restoration, of refusing to let violence steal their humanity. "I've never felt so helpless," Eliza confessed. "In the saloons, at least I could sing my way to the next meal. But this watching good people suffer because of truth. Truth's a dangerous thing in a land built on lies." Caleb replied. He set down the comb and rested his hands on her shoulders. But that doesn't make it less worth fighting for. Red Elk entered with Beatrice, who carried medical supplies and news. "The whole town's talking," she reported while tending Jed's injuries. "Some say Coyle went too far. Mrs. Morrison at the general store refused his men's service today. Small acts, but significant." "And Pike?" Caleb asked. "Disappeared. Some say he's riding to the county seat to file charges against you for assault with the rock slide." Beatrice's expression was grim. "Coyle's trying to make you the criminals." That night, they held council around the kitchen table. The evidence from Ghost Narrows was spread before them: photographs, affidavits, maps showing the truth of stolen water and murdered dreams. "We need to get you to Cheyenne," Beatrice said to Eliza. "Put you and these documents on the train to Denver before—" "No," Eliza's voice carried new steel. "I've run before. I ran from the railroad camps, ran from the shame of singing for coins, ran from every hard truth about myself. I won't run from this." Red Elk studied the maps with particular interest. "This cache at Sentinel Bluff, it's near the old ceremony grounds. My grandfather spoke of a time when the springs ran clear there." "That's our next move then," Caleb decided. "We get the rest of the evidence before they figure out where to look." Jed, propped against pillows, raised a shaking hand. "Son, you sure about this path once you stand against men like Coyle in the open? There's no going back to the life we had." Caleb looked at his father, then at Eliza. "The life we had is already gone. Pa, they made sure of that when they lit the match." He gestured at the smoke-stained walls. "Question is, do we rebuild as their subjects or as free men?" Over the following days, the ranch became a fortress of sorts. Neighbors who'd lost water to Coyle's manipulations began visiting after dark, sharing information, offering support. Old Sam Martinez brought ammunition. The widow Chen left preserved food. Even some of Coyle's own workers, tired of brutal conditions, whispered warnings about patrol schedules. Eliza found herself at the center of a quiet revolution. Her father's work had given voice to years of suppressed grievance. Each night, she and Caleb would sit with the documents, planning their next move while he gently worked the comb through her hair, a ritual that had become their anchor in the storm. "I used to think courage meant not being afraid," she told him one evening. "Now I know it means acting despite the fear." "You've got more courage than any dozen men I know," Caleb replied. "You could have taken those documents and sold them to Coyle, bought yourself safety and comfort. Instead, you're risking everything for people who called you impure." "Some did," Eliza acknowledged. "But you didn't. Your father didn't. Red Elk didn't. Maybe that's how change happens, one person at a time, seeing past the labels." Word came through Beatrice's network a federal marshal was indeed coming, but not for another week. They couldn't wait that long. Coyle was already moving to consolidate his water theft, and Pike had returned with legal documents of his own warrants for their arrest on charges of destruction of property and attempted murder. "Let them come," Caleb said grimly as he cleaned his rifle. "They want to make this a war. They'll find out ranch boys learn to shoot before we learn to read." But Eliza placed a hand on his arm. "No, we fight with truth, not bullets. Your father was right, we have to be better than them. Or we become them." The night before they planned to retrieve the Sentinel Bluff cache, snow began to fall early, even for Wyoming. Fat flakes drifted through the holes in the burned barn roof, covering the scars of violence with temporary white peace. In the kitchen, Caleb performed their ritual one more time before the dangerous journey ahead. As the silver comb moved through her hair, Eliza closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine a future where such simple intimacies weren't stolen moments between crises, where water flowed freely, where her past didn't define her worth, where a rancher's son could court a surveyor's daughter without the shadow of powerful men's greed hanging over them. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Caleb said softly, "I want you to know that seeing you truly seeing you has been the greatest gift of my life." Eliza turned and took his face in her hands. "Then see me now," she whispered. Not pure, not fallen, just a woman fighting for her father's legacy and the chance to love freely in a land that keeps its promises. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the burned grassland in merciful white. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight, in this smoke-scarred kitchen, two souls found strength in each other's recognition, and that, perhaps, was its own form of revolution. The path to Sentinel Bluff turned treacherous with the early snow, rocks slick with ice that had formed during the night's freeze-thaw cycle. Eliza studied the cliff face with her surveyor's eye, noting how the seasonal changes had widened existing cracks. "The safest route is never safe up here," she murmured, choosing their path among dangerous alternatives. They'd left before dawn, moving like shadows through a world transformed by white. Red Elk led, reading signs even the snow couldn't completely hide. Behind them, they'd left false trails and confusion, anything to buy time before Pike realized their destination. The ascent required all their skill. At one point, Eliza's horse slipped, sending loose stones clattering into the void below. Caleb reached out, steadying both mount and rider with the quick reflexes of a lifetime working cattle on rough ground. "Easy there," he soothed, though whether he spoke to the horse or Eliza was unclear. Perhaps both needed the reassurance. They found the cache exactly where her father's notes indicated a natural hollow sealed with carefully fitted stones. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and protected from years of weather, lay the most damning evidence yet forged water deeds with original signatures. Letters from the county clerk acknowledging bribes from Coyle, and a detailed ledger showing how the conspiracy reached all the way to territorial officials. "Lord Almighty," Caleb breathed, scanning the documents. "This isn't just theft, it's an entire system." From below, echoing up the canyon walls, came the sound they dreaded, hoofbeats and voices. Pike had found them, and from the noise, he'd brought a small army. Both ends of the trail. Red Elk reported after scouting. "Maybe 12 men. They learned from last time." They were trapped on the narrow bluff. Sheer drops on 3 sides and armed men blocking the only exit. Eliza felt the familiar panic rising, the same trapped sensation she'd known in the saloons when drunk men cornered her, demanding more than songs. She looked down at Pike climbing steadily upward, his face twisted with anticipation of victory. The words burst from her before she could stop them. "I'm not pure." The sob tore from her throat, not confession, but exhaustion. The weight of being forever judged, forever found wanting by men who measured worth in ways that favored only themselves. Caleb pressed the silver comb into her hand. Even here, balanced between life and death, he offered that gesture of care. "I don't seek purity," he said firmly. "I see you brave, honest, beautiful in your determination. That's enough. That's everything." Through her tears, Eliza's sharp eyes caught something crucial, the stress fractures in the rock face where Pike climbed. Her father's voice seemed to whisper, "Every formation has a breaking point. The earth teaches us patience, but also when to act." She pulled out her father's geological hammer, its weight familiar as an old friend. 3 precise strikes at the exact point where ice had done its patient work. The rock face shuddered. "The ledge!" someone screamed. The sheet of stone peeled away like old paint, taking Pike's handhold with it. He didn't fall far. Red Elk was right. The earth protected those who respected it, but far enough to send him tumbling back to the canyon floor in a tangle of limbs and curses. His men scattered as more rocks followed, nature adding its own emphasis to Eliza's calculated strike. In the chaos, they moved. Red Elk led them along a game trail he'd spotted, barely wide enough for horses but invisible from below. They descended the back face of the bluff in a controlled slide, trusting their mounts' mountain-bred instincts. Behind them, Pike's shouts of rage echoed off stone, but they were already away, carrying evidence that would reshape the territory's future. They didn't stop until they reached a sheltered grove miles from the bluff. There, as their horses heaved steam into the cold air. Eliza finally let herself feel the victory. They had everything, all her father's hidden documentation, enough to bring down Coyle's empire of theft.
"You did it,"
Caleb said, wonder in his voice.
"That strike, how did you know?"
"My father taught me to read the Earth's intentions," she replied. "Every surveyor learns that land has its own plans. We just help them along sometimes." Red Elk had already lit a small fire, and by its light, they organized the documents. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption that would shock even cynical federal investigators. "We need to move fast," Beatrice said when they reached the schoolhouse that night. She'd prepared everything for transmitting photographs via the telegraph system, a new technology that could send images over wire, though slowly and at great expense. "I've arranged for the night operator in Laramie to receive. He's trustworthy, lost his own farm to Coyle's schemes." Through the long night, they worked, Beatrice encoding and transmitting while Eliza prepared sworn statements to accompany the visual evidence. Caleb stood guard, rifle ready, while Red Elk watched the approaches. As dawn broke, the last image went through a photograph of the territorial secretary's signature on a forged deed. Evidence now rested in federal hands, beyond Coyle's reach to destroy or suppress. "It's done," Beatrice said, exhaustion clear in her voice. "Now we wait and pray Washington listens." They returned to the ranch to find Jed improved, but anxious. "Coyle's called a town meeting," he reported. "Planning to paint you all as criminals, anarchists disrupting lawful commerce."
"Let him,"
Eliza said with newfound steel.
"We have truth. He has only fear and greed."
That evening, in the ritual that had become their touchstone, Caleb again drew the silver comb through Eliza's hair, but this time she caught his hand and held it.
"You've given me something I never thought I'd have again,"
she said softly.
"Not just protection or affection, but the gift of being seen as whole. No matter what comes next, that's changed me forever."
"You changed yourself," Caleb replied. "I just held the mirror steady enough for you to see what was always there." Outside, snow began falling again, heavier now. Winter was coming in earnest, and with it, the final confrontation that would determine whether water and justice would flow freely in Wyoming territory. But in this moment, by lamplight, in a fire-scarred kitchen, two people who'd found each other across the divide of prejudice and pain allowed themselves to hope. The battle wasn't over. Coyle still held his dam. Pike still wore a badge, and the town still whispered about the saloon singer who'd brought trouble to their door. But evidence now rested in hands beyond corruption's reach, and in the mathematics of power. That changed everything. Red Elk entered quietly, shaking snow from his coat. "Riders coming, federal marshals by their bearing, 3 of them." Eliza stood, smoothing her dress with hands that no longer trembled. "Then it's time." She tucked the silver comb into her hair, a reminder of all the small acts of dignity that had brought her to this moment. Whatever came next, she would meet it as herself, not pure, not fallen, but standing steady as the mountains themselves, carrying her father's legacy forward into whatever judgment awaited. The federal marshals never arrived. Instead, Coyle made his move with the brutal efficiency of a man who'd grown impatient with half measures. He opened his dam's gates to flood his own mining operations while locking the agricultural channels completely. The message was clear: submit or watch your livestock die of thirst. By noon, desperate lines formed at the public wells. Women carried buckets while men argued over whose turn came next. The November cold made the water crisis even more acute. Cattle needed drink before the freeze locked everything in ice. Pike had vanished like smoke after the incident at Sentinel Bluff. Rumors placed him on official business, but those who knew better understood he was avoiding the reckoning that even corrupted badges couldn't deflect forever. In his absence, Coyle pushed newer, hungrier men to hunt for Eliza. Beatrice's schoolhouse suffered the first search. They came at dawn. 5 men with legal writs claiming suspected seditious materials. They overturned desks, scattered primers, and pried at floorboards. But Beatrice had survived frontier teaching for 15 years, her secret compartment behind false wall panels held firm.
"Find anything interesting,
gentlemen?" she asked mildly, serving coffee to the destroyers of her orderly classroom. "Perhaps you'd like to explain to the children why their slates are broken." At the Avery Ranch, Jed's condition worsened. The beating and smoke inhalation had taxed his aging body beyond easy recovery. Caleb divided his time between nursing his father, hunting for water sources, and protecting Eliza. The weight of adult responsibilities pressed down, grinding youth into premature age. One evening, as the first blizzard of the season howled outside, Eliza sat reading her father's letters aloud to Caleb. The old surveyor's words carried across time. True north by compass, true north by conscience. Never confuse them. Eliza girl, but never ignore either one.
"He knew what was coming,"
she said softly.
"These later entries, he was preparing me for this fight."
The warmth of the kitchen stove couldn't quite chase away the cold seeping through walls scarred by fire in this small sanctuary. Their nightly ritual continued. Caleb drew the silver comb through her hair with careful strokes. Each pass a reaffirmation of humanity in inhuman times.
"We're running out of time,"
Eliza said.
"Coyle knows we have evidence. Every day we wait,
every day more people see his true nature," Caleb countered. "Mrs. Morrison isn't the only one refusing his custom now. Even some of his miners are grumbling." Their conversation was interrupted by Red Elk's arrival, snow swirling through the door with him. "News from Denver," he announced. "The federal office received the transmissions. They're sending someone, but—" he paused, frustration clear. "The territorial governor is stalling, claiming jurisdictional disputes. The system designed to protect was instead protecting itself." Eliza felt the familiar weight of despair. How many times had she seen this, the powerful closing ranks, while the powerless suffered? As if reading her thoughts, Caleb set aside the comb and took her hands.
"This isn't like before. You're not alone in some railroad saloon,
dependent on the mercy of strangers. You have allies. You have proof. You have—" he paused, then continued more quietly. "You have me." Dawn brought unexpected visitors, a delegation of farmers' wives, led by the formidable Mrs. Weber, whose well had run dry the previous week. "We've come to see the maps," she announced. "If our men won't act, we will." Eliza spread her father's surveys across the kitchen table. The women studied them with the intense focus of those whose children's lives depended on understanding. Mrs. Chen traced the original watercourses with one finger. "Here my grandmother spoke of springs in this area. Coyle's dam diverted them all." The impromptu council of women became something more. They organized water sharing, established a schedule for the remaining wells, and, most importantly, began documenting everything. Every dry well, every sick calf, every family forced to buy water at Coyle's inflated prices. "Evidence," Beatrice said with satisfaction. "Not just maps and photographs, but human cost tallied in careful columns." Coyle responded to this organization with characteristic brutality. He announced a town meeting at the courthouse. Mandatory attendance required. Those who failed to appear would find their credit at the company store revoked, their grazing permits canceled. The morning of the meeting, Eliza stood before the mirror while Caleb performed their ritual grooming. The silver comb caught winter light from the window, its passage through her hair steady as always. But today felt different, a sense of ending, or perhaps beginning. "Whatever happens in there," Caleb said, "remember that you've already won something Coyle can never take. You've shown people the truth. That doesn't disappear, no matter what threats he makes." The courthouse filled with attention thick as smoke. Coyle stood at the front, flanked by hired guns, while Pike's replacement, a nervous man named Deputy Harlow, fidgeted with his badge. The crowd divided naturally. Coyle's people on one side, the water-starved farmers and their families on the other. Coyle began with accusations. Eliza Hart, a woman of questionable morals, a known entertainer from the saloon circuit, had brought chaos to their peaceful community. She'd corrupted the Avery boy, turned him against lawful authority. She'd stolen documents, destroyed property, incited rebellion. "Where is your evidence?" The voice came from the back old Sam Martinez, standing despite his arthritis. "You make accusations, but where is proof?" "Her past is proof enough," Coyle snarled. "A woman who sang in saloons, who entertained men for money." "I washed laundry for money, Mrs." Weber interrupted. "Does that make me fallen? My daughter serves drinks at the hotel. Is she impure?" The meeting began to shift, voices rising. Beatrice stood and unveiled something that stopped all argument, a blown-up photograph showing the original survey marker. Coyle's own signature on the fraudulent relocation document clearly visible beside it. "The evidence Miss Hart's father collected has been transmitted to federal authorities," she announced. "Every forged deed, every bribed official, every stolen drop of water documented and verified." The room erupted. Coyle's men moved toward Beatrice, but found their way blocked by a wall of farm wives who'd survived grasshopper plagues, tornadoes, and childbirth on the prairie. They stood firm as fence posts, daring the hired guns to strike. In the chaos, someone shouted, "Look outside!" Through the courthouse windows, riders were visible, not 3 federal marshals, but a full cavalry unit, their blue uniforms dark against the snow. At their head rode a man whose bearing suggested authority beyond local reach. Coyle's face went pale as ash. He barked orders, but his men were already calculating new odds. Federal troops meant federal authority, and that changed everything. Caleb found Eliza in the crowd, pulled her close. "It's happening," he said. "Your father's work. It's finally bringing justice." But Eliza's eyes remained on Coyle. Cornered animals were dangerous, and she'd learned that desperate men rarely surrendered gracefully. The battle for water rights was far from over, but at least now they wouldn't fight it alone. As the federal troops dismounted outside, she touched the silver comb in her hair, that symbol of dignity maintained through hardship. Whatever came next, she would meet it standing tall, carrying her father's legacy forward with the strength born of surviving her own trials and finding love in an unlikely place. The real confrontation was about to begin. The confrontation came at dawn, beneath the wooden skeleton of Coyle's Dam at Ghost Creek. The structure groaned under the weight of stolen water, its timbers dark with moisture while the land below lay parched. Coyle had gathered 12 armed men, their horses stamping nervously on the frozen ground. Across from them, Caleb stood with Red Elk, a handful of determined farmers, and Eliza's carefully drawn maps of the terrain. The northern wind cut like a blade, driving ice pellets that stung exposed skin. The creek, trapped behind rough-hewn logs, moaned like a wounded animal. Black cottonwoods bent before the gusts, their bare branches clawing at the gray sky. "You're trespassing on private property," Coyle shouted across the distance. His voice carried the desperation of a man watching his empire crumble. "Turn back now, or face the consequences." Caleb nudged his horse forward. "This dam stands on public land, built with stolen permits. We have the federal documents to prove it." His breath clouded in the frigid air. "Stand aside, Coyle. Let the water flow where nature intended." Eliza had spent the previous night studying her father's engineering notes. The dam wasn't meant to be destroyed. Such violence would flood the lower valleys catastrophically. Instead, she'd identified the auxiliary spillway, designed but never built, that would allow controlled release. Her surveyor's eye had found structural weaknesses where selective pressure could open channels without collapse. "There," she pointed, her voice carrying to Caleb through the wind. "The overflow gate in the original plans. The wood is weakest where the ice has worked between the joints." The standoff stretched taut as fence wire. Then Pike emerged from behind the dam's eastern approach, rifle raised. He'd been hiding, waiting for the perfect shot. Red Elk saw him first, spurring his mount between Pike and Caleb just as the rifle cracked. The bullet caught Red Elk in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. He hit the ground hard but conscious, his blood stark against the snow. The violence triggered chaos, horses rearing, men shouting, guns clearing leather. Caleb dismounted in one fluid motion, using his horse's cover while he rushed to Red Elk. Behind him, the farmers spread out, taking positions behind whatever scant cover the riverbank provided. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, fighting uphill against fortified positions. In the melee, Eliza slipped from her horse and worked her way toward the dam's base. The auxiliary gate mechanism was there, just as the blueprints indicated, rusted shut but intact. She pulled her father's tools from her saddlebag, hands steady despite the gunfire crackling overhead. Pike advanced down the earthen dam face, boots slipping on icy wood. Caleb tracked his movement while pressing cloth to Red Elk's wound. At 30 yards, Pike's advantage would be decisive. At 20, unavoidable. But Caleb had spent his life roping cattle in rough country. The lariat flew true, catching Pike's ankle just as he tried to navigate a patch of frozen runoff. The deputy went down hard, rifles spinning away into the churning shallows where ice met current. "The gate!" Eliza called. "I need help with the wheel." 2 farmers broke cover, rushing to assist. Together they strained against years of rust and deliberate neglect. The mechanism groaned, fought, then suddenly gave way. Water began seeping, then flowing, then surging through the auxiliary channel. Coyle screamed orders, but the selective flooding Eliza had engineered caught his mounted men in the spillway zone. Horses foundered in sudden mud, riders struggling to control their mounts as the ground beneath them transformed from iron-hard freeze to treacherous mire. What had been their advantage, high ground and mobility, became a trap of their own making. Pike tried to regain his feet, slipping on moss-slick planks. Caleb closed the distance, months of fury and fear crystallizing into this moment. They grappled on the narrow maintenance walkway, each seeking leverage on the treacherous footing. "You burned our barn," Caleb growled through gritted teeth. "You beat my father. You terrorized the woman I—" The sentence ended in a grunt of effort as Pike tried to throw him into the churning water below. They rolled, struggled, Pike's greater weight telling. Then Eliza appeared, her father's surveying chain in her hands. One precise swing caught Pike's wrist, the metal links wrapping and binding. Caleb used the opening to land a rancher's punch, nothing fancy, just knuckles hardened by years of work meeting jaw. Pike toppled backward, caught himself on the rail, then lost his grip on the ice-slicked wood. The fall wasn't far. Eliza had been right about the earth protecting those who respected it, but the current caught him, dragging him downstream in a tumble of curses and splashing. The auxiliary flow spread across the old creek bed, finding channels that remembered water's touch, not a destructive flood, but a restoration, the land drinking deep after manufactured drought. Coyle's men, mired and demoralized, began throwing down weapons. Coyle himself stood at the dam's crest, watching his empire dissolve. "You don't understand," he shouted at Caleb. This was progress order, the strong making decisions for the weak. "Water isn't victory," Caleb replied, supporting Red Elk with one arm. "It's life, for everyone, ranchers, farmers, Cheyenne, even your miners. You forgot that in your greed." The federal cavalry arrived as the confrontation ended, their timing suggesting they'd waited to see which way the conflict would turn. Their commander, a weathered major named Patterson, surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. "Silas Coyle," he announced, "you're under arrest for fraud, corruption, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of their legal water rights." He gestured to his men. "Secure the prisoner." As Coyle was led away, still ranting about his vision of ordered prosperity, Eliza stood by the flowing water. The creek sang its freedom, a sound she hadn't heard since childhood. Red Elk, wound-packed but stable, managed a rare smile. "The water remembers its path," he said, "like people remember truth when someone's brave enough to speak it." Caleb found Eliza there, pulled her close despite the mud and ice coating them both. "You did it," he said. "Your father would be proud." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us. Even the earth itself seemed to take our side." They stood together, watching Ghost Creek run free for the first time in years. The silver comb had fallen from her hair during the fight, lost somewhere in the mud and violence. But it didn't matter. What it represented: dignity, care, the daily choice to see someone's worth lived in how Caleb's hand found hers, how their community had stood together, how water now flowed toward all who needed it. Pike was pulled from the creek a mile downstream, half drowned and fully defeated. The badge he'd worn was gone, lost to the current along with the authority it had represented. He faced charges alongside Coyle, the protected becoming the prosecuted, as the sun broke through the clouds, warming the frozen battlefield. Eliza realized the fight was won, but the work just beginning. Restoration took longer than destruction. Trust grew slower than suspicion. But here, beside running water, surrounded by neighbors who'd risked everything for justice, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death home. "What now?" Caleb asked, voicing what they all wondered. "Now we rebuild," Eliza said, properly this time, with surveys that tell truth and water that flows where nature intended. The cavalry began organizing the prisoners while Red Elk was tended by their field medic. Farmers waded into the restored creek, laughing like children as they felt the current. And somewhere downstream, the Cheyennes' ancient camping grounds would soon know the return of the springs that had sustained them for generations. Justice, Eliza reflected, flowed like water finding its level, persisting despite obstacles, carving new channels when old ones were blocked. And like water, it was meant to be shared, not hoarded. That was the lesson written in mud and snow this bitter morning, a truth her father had died documenting and she had risked everything to defend. United States Marshal John Patterson arrived in Ash Mesa 3 days after the dam confrontation, his weathered duster bearing the dust of hard miles, unlike the federal cavalry who'd come for show. Patterson carried the quiet authority of a man who'd seen frontier justice in all its forms. He spread Eliza's evidence across the courthouse table: photographs, maps, affidavits, each document a piece in the puzzle of systematic theft. "Miss Hart," he said, studying her with eyes that had witnessed too much to be easily fooled. "This evidence could reshape water law across the entire territory. Are you prepared to testify in federal court?" Beatrice had gathered witnesses throughout the town. The widow Morrison spoke of wells that ran dry just as her husband lay dying of fever. Miners testified about being forced to buy water at inflated prices while Coyle's operations ran full flow. The banker's clerk, granted immunity, detailed the forged loans that had stolen farms when drought made payment impossible. Caleb stood silent through the testimonies, his presence a steady anchor for Eliza. He'd cleaned up from the dam fight, but the new lines around his eyes spoke of innocence lost. When Coyle was brought in, shackled between two marshals, Caleb's jaw tightened, but he made no move toward violence. He was learning that true justice required restraint, not revenge. "You think you've won," Coyle snarled at the assembly. "But progress doesn't stop for sentiment. Someone else will dam that creek. Someone else will bring order to this chaos. Order built on theft is no order at all." Patterson replied calmly. He turned to Pike, who sat hunched and shivering, his near drowning having washed away all bravado. "Deputy Pike, you're charged with assault, attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud, and violation of your oath of office." Pike's response came as a whisper. "I was just following orders, keeping the peace." "You were keeping the pieces," Eliza said, finding her voice. "Pieces of silver for every family you helped destroy." The formal proceedings took all day. Each witness added their thread to the tapestry of corruption. When Eliza's turn came, she spoke clearly, her father's surveying notes in hand. She explained the moved markers, the falsified measurements, the careful system by which public water became private profit. "My father died for these numbers," she said, her voice steady though her heart raced. "Not because they're just numbers, but because they represent lives. Every diverted stream meant a family forced to abandon their land. Every stolen acre-foot meant children sick from bad water. The arithmetic of greed has a human cost." When the testimony concluded, Patterson announced that the case would be heard in Cheyenne's federal court. The territorial authorities had been superseded. This would be decided by judges beyond local influence. The train platform buzzed with activity a week later. Witnesses, marshals, and evidence all bound for the territorial capital. Eliza stood with her single valise, so different from the frightened woman who'd clutched her father's satchel in the mud months ago. "I should come with you," Caleb said for the third time. "Your father needs you here," Eliza replied gently. "The ranch needs rebuilding. The cattle need water. I'll be back." He pressed something into her hand, a new silver comb, simpler than her mother's, but polished to a soft gleam. "For luck," he said, "and to remember that someone here sees you clearly, no matter what that courtroom brings." On the train, Eliza watched the landscape scroll past the land she'd fought for, now beginning to heal as water found its natural courses again. Beatrice sat beside her, papers organized with teacherly precision. Red Elk, arm still bound but healing clean, had taken a seat where he could watch all approaches. "You've changed," Beatrice observed. "That frightened girl who stumbled into my schoolhouse is gone." "Not gone," Eliza corrected. "Just quieter. She's still there when Pike's name is mentioned. When I think about singing for coins." She touched the simple comb in her hair. "But she doesn't control me anymore." Cheyenne's courthouse stood like a fortress of limestone and law. The courtroom filled with observers, newspaper reporters, government officials, representatives from other territories watching to see how this precedent might affect their own water disputes. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Morse, laid out the case with surgical precision. Each document Eliza had preserved became evidence. Each photograph told its story. The survey markers spoke their own language of deliberate deception. Coyle had hired Denver lawyers, men in fine suits who spoke of progress and development, of the need for strong leadership in taming the frontier. They painted Eliza as a fallen woman seeking revenge, a manipulator who'd seduced the Avery boy into violence. When they questioned her virtue, bringing up the saloon work, Eliza felt the old shame rise. But then she caught sight of the farm wives in the gallery, women who'd stood with her against armed men. Their faces showed not judgment but solidarity. "Yes, I sang in saloons," she said clearly. "I survived, just as these farmers' wives survived drought and locusts, as the miners' wives survived cave-ins and poverty. Survival is not a sin, counselor. Theft is." The defense tried to break her composure, to make her sob about her impurity as she had in moments of despair. But Eliza had learned something in the months since her father's death. That dignity wasn't about never falling, but about how you stood back up. Caleb arrived on the trial's third day, Jed having insisted he go. "That girl's fighting for all of us," the old man had wheezed. "Least you can do is be there when she needs strength." He slipped into the courtroom just as Pike took the stand, trying to paint himself as a dutiful officer overwhelmed by circumstances. But under cross-examination, his story crumbled like the dam gates under pressure. He admitted to taking bribes, to falsifying reports, to leading the attack on peaceful citizens. The moment came when Pike, desperate to shift blame, pointed at Eliza. "She tempted us all, a saloon woman pretending to be respectable, using her wiles to turn honest men into—" "Into what?" Caleb's voice cut across the courtroom. He'd stood without planning to, his weathered hands gripping the gallery rail. "Into men who beat elders, who burn barns with animals inside, who steal water from babies. She didn't tempt you to that. Pike,
You chose it. Every step.
The judge gavelled for order. But the damage to Pike's narrative was done. He shrank in the witness chair, the facade of victimhood cracking. The trial's final day brought judgment. The judge, a Lincoln appointee named Harrison Wells who'd seen enough frontier corruption to recognize its patterns, delivered his verdict with careful authority. Coyle received 20 years hard labor, his assets seized for reparations. The dam would be modified to allow natural flow while still serving legitimate mining needs. Pike got 10 years. His badge permanently revoked. The water rights were restored to their original boundaries, with federal oversight to prevent future manipulation. But the judge saved his final words for Eliza. Miss Hart, this court recognizes the courage required to stand against entrenched power. Your father's work, preserved and presented through your efforts, has exposed a system of theft that might have continued for decades. The territory owes you a debt of gratitude. Outside the courthouse, in Cheyenne's thin winter sunshine, Eliza stood with Caleb as reporters shouted questions and photographers captured the moment. She thought of her father, of his patient measuring of truth. She thought of her mother's comb, lost in the fight but not forgotten. What will you do now? A reporter called. Eliza looked at Caleb, then back at the questioner. Go home, she said simply. There's surveying work to be done, boundaries to be properly marked. Water doesn't manage itself. The return journey felt different. The train carried not a frightened woman fleeing judgment, but a surveyor's daughter returning to continue her father's work. At each station, people gathered, some to stare at the scandalous woman from the newspapers, but more to thank her for fighting when they couldn't. Ash Mesa's platform was crowded when they arrived. Jed had made the journey from the ranch, supported by neighbors. The farm wives stood in a group, their faces proud. Even some of Coyle's former workers waited, caps in hand, to apologize for their part in the system of theft. That night, in the rebuilt kitchen of the Avery Ranch, Caleb performed their ritual one last time as unmarried souls. The new comb moved through her hair with the same gentle care as always. But now it carried the weight of shared victory along with survived hardship. The trial's over, he said softly. But I suspect your work is just beginning. Our work, Eliza corrected. Water rights need protecting, boundaries need honest surveying, and, she turned to meet his eyes, this ranch needs a woman who understands both cattle and creek flow. Winter gave way to spring with a gentleness that surprised everyone after the harsh months of conflict. Ghost Creek ran clear and steady, its voice a constant song through the valley, where alkali flats had spread like disease. Green shoots now pushed through the soil. The land was learning to breathe again. Eliza had been appointed Regional Water Rights Registrar, a position created specifically to prevent another Coyle-style theft. The work meant long hours with maps and documents, more time reading boundary markers than arguing in courtrooms. She found she preferred it that way, truth measured in careful increments rather than dramatic revelations. Her office occupied a corner of the new municipal building, its window overlooking the creek. From there, she could see the modified dam, now operated on a schedule that served all users fairly. Farmers received water for planting, the mine got its industrial allocation, and the Cheyenne's traditional grounds knew the return of seasonal flows. Caleb had transformed the Avery Ranch operations to match the new water reality. Instead of fighting the land's rhythms, he worked with them. The cattle moved on a schedule that respected both grazing needs and water table recovery. He'd learned to file permits properly rather than relying on handshake agreements and customary use. Never thought I'd see you filling out government forms, Jed teased one evening, though pride colored his voice. The old man had recovered slowly but surely, spending his days teaching younger ranchers the patient ways of sustainable grazing. Red Elk had become the official liaison between the water board and the tribal communities. His wound had healed clean, leaving only a scar and a slight stiffness in cold weather. He brought traditional knowledge to the modern management system which springs could handle draw, where the underground flows connected.
how the old ones had shared water without written law, on a morning bright with possibility. Eliza stood with Beatrice at the new school well. Children lined up with cups, no longer needing to ration their drinking water. The teacher had expanded her curriculum to include basic surveying skills, ensuring the next generation would understand their landscape's true boundaries. They're calling it the Ash Mesa model in Denver. Beatrice reported, "Other territories want to know how we shifted from water wars to water cooperation." "We told the truth," Eliza replied simply, "and people died for it. Papa, the others' coil destroyed their sacrifice, demanded we do better." The complicated work of restoration revealed itself in small moments. Mrs. Morrison's new vegetable garden, finally able to access irrigation. The mine workers' children playing in creek shallows that had been dry for years. Even former coil supporters finding legitimate work as the economy adjusted to shared prosperity rather than hoarded resources. Eliza and Caleb's relationship had evolved with the same steady patience as the land's recovery. Evening walks along the creek became their courtship ritual. Accompanied by the sound of flowing water and returning wildlife, he'd point out good grazing spots. She'd explain the surveyor's marks that protected them. One such evening, as sunset painted the red rocks gold, Caleb stopped at a bend where willows trailed their fingers in the current. "This spot," he said quietly. "Your father's maps show it as a traditional gathering place, sacred to the Cheyenne, vital to the early settlers. Water brought people together here for generations. Until someone decided to own it all," Eliza added, understanding where he was leading. "But now it's flowing again, bringing people together again." He took her hands, work-calloused meeting, ink-stained. "Eliza Hart, would you let this rancher's son share your water rights permanent-like?" She laughed, not the nervous giggle of her saloon days, but the full, free sound of a woman who'd found her place. "Only if you promise to keep combing my hair when it's gray and thin." "Every night," he vowed, "long as these hands can hold a comb." Their wedding took place by Ghost Creek on a June morning when wildflowers carpeted the banks. Beatrice stood as witness alongside Red Elk. Jed, despite his shakiness, insisted on standing through the ceremony. The crowd included farmers, ranchers, miners, townspeople, and a delegation from the Cheyenne, all united by the water that flowed freely past. Eliza wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered and aired, in her hair. The simple silver comb Caleb had given her caught the morning light. As they exchanged vows, she thought of all the moments that had led here, the mud and shame of that first meeting, the patient grooming that restored her dignity, the fights that tested their resolve. Water finds its level. The minister intoned, adapting traditional words to fit the couple before him. So too does love find its true course, flowing around obstacles, persisting through drought, always seeking its natural home. The celebration afterward mixed traditions as freely as the creek mixed snowmelt and spring water. Cheyenne drums echoed Welsh mining songs. Mexican guitar accompanied German polkas. Mrs. Chen's dumplings shared tables with Beatrice's famous apple cake. It was the West as it could be, diverse waters flowing into one stream. As evening approached, Caleb and Eliza slipped away to the rebuilt ranch house. In their bedroom now, officially theirs, he took up the silver comb for their first grooming as husband and wife. The ritual had new weight now, sanctified by law and community recognition. From saloon singer to water registrar to rancher's wife, Eliza mused as the comb moved through her hair. Quite a journey. You were never just a saloon singer, Caleb corrected gently. You were always a surveyor's daughter, a keeper of truth, a fighter for justice. The labels others put on you, those were the lies. This is who you truly are. A knock interrupted them. Red Elk stood at the door with an elderly Cheyenne woman. She carried something wrapped in beautifully beaded leather. For the water speaker, the woman said in accented English. She unwrapped the gift, Eliza's mother's silver comb, the one lost in the dam fight. The river gave it to us. We return it to you, as you return the river to us. Eliza accepted it with tears streaming. The comb was tarnished, scarred by its journey, but intact, like her. It had survived violence and emerged marked but unbroken. That night, with 2 combs on the dresser, one representing her past, one her future, Eliza lay beside her husband, listening to Ghost Creek's song through the open window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Water rights required constant vigilance. Old prejudices died hard. The work of building a just society never truly ended. But tonight, she was simply a woman loved and seen clearly, in a home built on truth, in a land learning to share its gifts. Her father's voice seemed to whisper with the water, "True north, Eliza girl, you found it." The creek flowed on, patient and persistent, teaching all who listened that abundance came not from hoarding but from sharing, that power meant not controlling but connecting, that the purest thing in the world was not innocence but integrity. And in the house by the water, 2 souls who'd found each other across the divide of prejudice settled into the rhythm of a life built on bedrock truth, as enduring as the mountains, as vital as the streams that carved them, as precious as silver combs passing through hair in gentle affirmation of human worth. Summer settled over Wyoming territory like a benediction. The brief drought that visited in July passed without panic. The water-sharing system held firm. Neighbors helping neighbors as the creek levels dropped, then recovered. The land had learned resilience, and so had its people. Caleb guided the cattle across the designated crossing, pausing to let the Smith's herd drink first. 2 years ago, such deference would have been unthinkable. Water rights were seized, not shared. Now, men tipped their hats in mutual respect, understanding that the creek served all or served none. Eliza stood at the survey point with her 2 newest apprentices, young women whose families had been saved by the water reforms. She taught them to read the land's language, how erosion patterns told stories, how rock strata revealed ancient watercourses, how to place markers that would speak truth to future generations. "My father used to say that a surveyor reads the earth like scripture," she explained, demonstrating the proper use of the transit. "Every measurement is a moral choice. Place it true, and you serve justice. Place it false, and you serve greed." The afternoon sun warmed the red rocks to glowing. In the distance, smoke rose from the mine's operations, but now it ran on schedule, releasing water to downstream users when shifts ended. Even industry had learned the rhythm of sharing. At the schoolhouse, Beatrice conducted her expanded classes. Children who once carried water in precious cups now studied maps and measurements. Understanding their landscape's true wealth lay not in hoarding but in husbanding. The next generation would know their boundaries, both physical and ethical. "Mrs. Avery's coming," a child called, and young faces turned toward the window. Eliza smiled at her married name, still fresh enough to bring warmth. She'd kept her maiden name for official documents. Water Registrar Eliza Hart carried more authority than Mrs. Avery, but in daily life, she wore both identities comfortably. That evening, as golden light slanted across the ranch, Caleb found her checking the creek gauge they'd installed. The simple measurement tool had become a symbol of transparency. Anyone could verify the flow, removing suspicion from water management. "Good numbers?" he asked, though he already knew. They'd developed their own language of small talk, where water levels and cattle weights carried the subtext of affection. "Steady and true," she replied, then pointed downstream. "Look there." A family of beavers had returned, building their dam with nature's engineering. The animals' presence marked the ecosystem's recovery better than any human measurement could. They walked home hand in hand, past the spot where they'd first met her face in mud, his hands gentle with a silver comb. The memory no longer brought shame, but gratitude for the journey it had started. Inside their kitchen, the evening ritual continued. Caleb drew the comb through her hair, now sun-streaked from fieldwork, a few early silver strands catching the lamplight. The motion remained tender as their first night, but familiarity had added layers of meaning. "Heard from Denver today," Eliza mentioned. "They want to send observers to document our system. Apparently, water wars are breaking out in Colorado, and they need our template. Let them come, Caleb said. Though I wonder if they'll understand it's not just about the maps and schedules. It's about, he paused, searching for words. Trust, Eliza finished. Built one conversation at a time, one shared drink at a time. A knock brought Red Elk with news. The council met today. They're establishing a permanent water ceremony at the old grounds, first time in 20 years. His scarred shoulder barely showed stiffness now. The old wound healed as clean as the land itself. They sat together on the porch as stars emerged. Ghost Creek's voice carried clearly no longer a whisper of stolen water, but a song of abundance. Somewhere in the darkness, a mountain lion called. Another predator returned to the healing ecosystem. Father would be amazed, Eliza said softly. His maps didn't just document theft, they became blueprints for restoration. He'd be proud, Caleb corrected, of what you built from his foundation. The next morning brought the water distribution meeting, a monthly gathering that had replaced the old system of might makes right. Farmers, ranchers, miners, and townspeople sat together, discussing needs and negotiating schedules. Eliza moderated with her maps spread before them. Every boundary clear, every right documented. Old Sam Martinez raised a concern about his lower pasture. Misses. Chen suggested a rotation that would serve both their needs. The mine foreman agreed to adjust his heavy use hours. Consensus built like sediment slowly but steadily. During a break, Mrs. Morrison pulled Eliza aside. I need to say something. When you first came here, I was one of those whispering about your past. Shameful of me. You've shown more Christian charity than any of us proper ladies. We all have pasts, Eliza replied gently. What matters is the future we build together. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A young woman, clearly nervous, approached Eliza's office. Her dress marked her as what the town once called fallen, a saloon worker from the rail camps. I heard, she began hesitantly, that you understand. I want to change. But everyone sees what I was, not what I could be. Eliza closed the door for privacy, remembering her own desperate days. Sit, she said kindly. Let's talk about surveying. The territory needs more people who can read the land truthfully. Your past doesn't disqualify you, it might even help you see boundaries others miss. By the time the woman left, she carried basic surveying texts and a letter of introduction to Beatrice's school. Another life beginning its transformation. Another soul refusing to be defined by its hardest chapters. That evening, Caleb noticed Eliza's thoughtful mood. As he combed her hair, she shared the encounter. I saw myself in her eyes, that ear that you're forever marked. You gave her what I gave you, he said simply, a chance to be seen differently. What you gave me was more than that. Eliza turned to face him. You gave me daily proof that dignity isn't about perfection. It's about the choice to keep going, to keep growing. Outside, summer thunder rumbled over the mountains, promising rain. The sound no longer brought anxiety about flash floods or drought, but simple gratitude for nature's patterns. The water table had recovered enough to handle whatever came. A year later, the Ash Mesa model had spread across 3 territories. Federal water law had been rewritten based on Eliza's documentation. The surveyor's daughter, who'd once sobbed, "I'm not pure," now testified before Congress about sustainable water management. But the real victory showed in smaller ways. In children playing in streams their parents had never seen run. In the Cheyenne ceremonies returning to traditional sites. In former enemies sharing coffee at the monthly water meetings. In the young woman who'd sought Eliza's help now running her own surveying crew. On a clear autumn morning, Eliza stood where her father had made his fatal stand for truth. Caleb beside her. Their hands joined. They placed a simple marker. William Hart, surveyor. He measured truth when lies were profitable. He would have loved seeing this, Eliza said, gesturing at the valley where water flowed freely, where boundaries served clarity rather than control.
He does see it, Caleb replied. Through your eyes, your work. Every true measurement honors him. They walked home along the creek, past willows trailing in current, past beaver dams and cattle crossings, past all the small miracles of a landscape allowed to follow its nature. At the house, the evening ritual awaited silver comb through graying hair, love expressed in daily care. The story could end here, with justice served and love triumphant. But life flows on like water, always moving, always teaching. Eliza continued her work, training the next generation to read truth in the land. Caleb evolved the ranch toward even more sustainable practices. Red Elk's children learned both traditional knowledge and modern surveying. Beatrice's students went forth to heal other wounded territories. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Eliza would hold both silver combs her mother's, recovered from violence, and Caleb's gift, worn smooth by use, in their tarnished surfaces. She saw her journey reflected from shame to dignity, from isolation to community, from stolen water to shared abundance. The creek sang on, patient teacher of persistence. In its voice lived the truth her father died protecting, that resources meant for all could not be hoarded by few without poisoning the very source. Justice, like water, must flow freely or it stagnates. And love, true love, sees past labels to the soul beneath, offering daily grace through acts as simple and essential as drawing a comb through tangled hair. In the Wyoming twilight, with stars emerging like promises kept, Eliza Hart Avery closed her father's journal after adding the final entry, survey complete, boundaries true, water flows where nature intended. The work continues. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the untamed lands of Wyoming Territory, where love bloomed amid the fight for justice and water rights. I hope Eliza and Caleb's story touched your heart as it did mine. Where are you listening to this tale right now? Are you driving through the mountains, sitting by a cozy fire, or perhaps taking a break from your daily work? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world these Wild West stories are reaching. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, romance, and redemption from the American frontier. And please, share your thoughts about Eliza's transformation and the power of being truly seen. Your comments mean the world to me, and they help shape the stories I choose to tell. Until the next time, partners, keep riding toward your own true north.